You're not going to believe this, but in the ancient world, people told a lot of tall tales. If you were a king or a hero, they might say you were brought into this world by special circumstances, perhaps fathered by a god. Some notable figures could heal the sick and even raise the dead. Turning water into wine was thought possible. So was controlling the weather. There were esteemed figures who died and came back to life, and many others who became immortal gods that ascended to heaven. So when you see this kind of stuff in an ancient religion like Christianity, what do you suppose is going on? We can use a lot of scholarly jargon when discussing this stuff, but frankly, this ain't rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. The only way to avoid the implications of all this is to bob, weave, and make a whole lot of excuses. You have to do a metric ton of heavy lifting and mental gymnastics to avoid grasping the obvious.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
That, my friends, summarizes the job description of Christian apologists like Eric Manning, who's here to tell us why none of this matters and atheists should reconsider Christianity. Sit back, put your legs up, have an iced tea, or inject heavy narcotics while I break this down in the simplest terms possible.
There are tons of different religions that make a barrage of miracle claims. Is there any way to rely on miracles as proof for a specific faith? There are miracle claims in Islam, right? There are miracle claims in all kinds of religions. You got Satya Sai Baba, you got Indian gurus, you have, all kinds of Roman emperors supposedly performing miracles at certain points in history and all these other stuff. Where do we even begin, right? This is kind of Hume's other argument in the second part of his essay. And so this is where we want to enter the doubts filter. So what if I told you that there was a religiously neutral criteria that we could use and shave things away so we don't have to waste our time herring after every miracle claim that's out there?
I would say, given how painfully obvious it is that Christianity constitutes typical myths and legends of the day, that you have your work cut out for you. So you're going to construct a seemingly neutral set of filters that discard other myths and religions, but somehow give the one religion that you grew up with a pass. By the end of this, I'll bet we don't get a single example of a purported miracle outside of Christianity that passes your test. But Jesus will come out shining like a golden turd. Fancy that.
And so the doubts filter, we're going to talk about all of these. There's dissident events, opinions already established. I'm getting this from Tim McGrew. Tim McGrew is a philosophy instructor, and philosophy instructors love their acronyms, apparently. The U is uncertain and undetailed events. We also have belated reports, trivial events, and self-serving events. So we're going to talk about all of these in turn. And so one of the things, if you guys remember my conversation with Derek Lambert of the Myth Vision podcast, is he was just like, well, you guys just think that Jesus is special. You're special pleading. You're making an exception for the guy that you really like, but there are all these other miracles. There are all these other myths. There are these other legends that you don't believe either. So why are you, and again, even historical figures that we know existed that said they perform miracles, why are you making a special exception for Jesus?
Derek Lambert just wants to sin. Believe me, I've met him, even lived with him in his own home. The kid loves crack cocaine. Give him a break.
And so let's talk about some of the criteria. Distance, when the first port is only made at a great distance of the event. So an example of that, all the miracles attributed to Apollonius of Tyana were initially described as occurring hundreds of miles away from where his biographer Philostratus was writing. And so for those of you who don't know, Apollonius, Bart Ehrman really likes to use this example a lot. He lived around the same time of Jesus. I believe he lived from 25 to 100 AD. He was a Greek miracle worker, philosopher, traveled all over the world, India, all these different places, allegedly performing miracles and exorcisms and all these different things. Well, Philostratus was writing in Greece. Apollonius is doing these things hundreds of miles away. And so right there off the bat is a bit of a problem.
We've been over this, Eric. Letters telling of the miracles performed by the 17th century Messiah figure Sabbatai Sevi were written in the very places he passed through on his travels. Faith healer William Marion Branham raised a boy from the dead, according to eyewitness testimony from a pastor who was there for the event. Dubious legends require little time or space to propagate. These factors are entirely irrelevant, whether we're talking decades, years, months, weeks, or days, far away or nearby. Tall tales crop up indiscriminately. So all of this is a distraction, a red herring. Both Jesus and Apollonius fit the mold of the divine man category of Hellenistic lore, exorcising demons, raising the dead, and ascending to heaven like various legendary figures before them. It is the archetypal nature of these corresponding elements that flag them as common legends of the time in either case.
It's kind of like that guy that you knew in high school or college who's like, hey, I have this really amazing, smoking hot supermodel girlfriend, and he shows you a picture of a glamour shot as evidence. And then when you're like, oh, really? Wow, when do we get to meet her? Well, she lives in Canada. It's like, okay, buddy, sure.
It's kind of like that Savior who was raised from the dead and now lives forever. Cool, when do we get to meet him? Well, he lives far away from here in heaven. Okay, buddy, sure. And do notice that this is the standard protocol for every single divine man in Mediterranean antiquity who was said to rise from death or become immortal. Romulus, Asclepius, Hercules, Caesar, Jesus, they all get cast to a celestial sphere where their immortality cannot be falsified. Probably not a coincidence.
So how about opinions already established, right? When miracles confirm or affirm established opinions and prejudices, we have some reasons to be skeptical. Here's another one that Bart Ehrman likes to use a lot. He did this in his debate with Justin Bass. He used the example of Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidic Judaism and was renowned for his mystical powers. The problem with the stories of Baal Shem Tov is that the legends about him arose within the community itself without any adverse consequences for putting them forward or any apparent critical examination. And so using the Baal Shem Tov as saying, hey, why aren't you investigating him? I don't think that really works, because this is something that sprung up where people already believed in Baal Shem Tov, okay?
The pattern of desperately seeking any excuse one can find to rule out other miracles while affirming the ones you favor is patently obvious by now. Didn't the miracles of Christ emerge within communities that already believed in a coming Messiah? Didn't the scriptures already include literary motifs of death and redemption, atonement and salvation, national and cosmic renewal? If the earliest followers of Jesus placed their faith in him as the long-awaited Messiah, didn't they already believe specifically in him? And wouldn't the stories they told about him reflect this? The blind spot in Eric's rearview mirror is so egregious that you almost have to wonder if he's a Poe. And while some religious movements didn't face adverse consequences for their faith, others quite notably did, including Islam and Mormonism. Early Mormons were so fiercely persecuted that they fled all the way to Salt Lake Valley. In fact, 17 Mormons were killed at an incident in Missouri. Adversity and persecution are no match for the sheer will to believe.
Now let's talk about undetailed events. Again, if you watch the debate with Bart Ehrman and Justin Bass, one of the things that he brought up was Joseph Smith and the angel Moroni and the three witnesses who actually signed affidavits, okay, that they saw the angel Moroni and the golden plates. The problem with these affidavits is they don't offer any specific details regarding the day, the time, the location, or other circumstances of the event. The absence of this information raises questions, particularly considering that the document is intended to be a signed statement validating their encounter. And so, what was the appearance of the angel Moroni like? Did they eat with him? Did they touch him? What time of day was it? Where were they?
The real pot of gold for most Christian apologists is the early creed in 1 Corinthians 15 concerning the post-mortem appearances of Jesus, because here Paul is sharing a statement that he received elsewhere, meaning it predates his own writing. Here's the apologetical goldmine for your own perusal. Notice we get no details whatsoever of the time, place, circumstances, or even the nature of Jesus' post-mortem form. It's about as bare bones as anything can get. Eric Manning realizes this, so he punts to the maximal case for Jesus' resurrection, which admits that Paul's letters, the earliest documents in the New Testament, are insufficient on their own for proving the resurrection. Ergo, one must appeal to the later gospel accounts. Notice that employing such a strategy is already on its face a hackneyed attempt to demonstrate what one wishes to be true rather than following the evidence wherever it leads. At any rate, the Gospels do provide richer and more detailed accounts than Paul's letters because they're an altogether different genre. Paul is writing theological treatises, and the Gospels, by contrast, are Greco-Roman prose narratives. They're rich in detail because that's what literature, including fictive literature, is supposed to do. And it's for this same reason that you're going to get details in the Gospels that you wouldn't find in sworn affidavits like those of the early Mormon witnesses to Moroni. They're different genres. At least in the case of Mormonism, we do have actual statements from multiple first-hand witnesses, something that early Christianity altogether lacks. And despite Manning's best efforts to show otherwise, the Gospels are not written by witnesses. They are interdependent narratives that build off one another in precisely the way you wouldn't expect if they constituted independent witnesses with their own recollection of the events. For instance, if Matthew is a witness, why on earth is he so heavily reliant on Mark? The apologist will say it's because he valued Peter's testimony as provided by Mark. But A, there's no evidence in Mark that he's relaying anything told to him by Peter, and B, Matthew alters Mark wherever he sees fit, sometimes even contradicting him. Is Peter's testimony really that valuable if he's wrong on numerous occasions? Let's be real. If Matthew is his own witness, then he doesn't need Mark. As it stands, he's rewriting Mark because he's a non-eyewitness storyteller who's building on a previous tradition. If you apologists say you prefer the simplest explanation with the least ad hoc assumptions, then there you go. Matthew is no eyewitness, and by the same rationale, neither is Luke or John. They are one and all expounding on literary traditions that have been passed down to them.
So what about belated reports? When the first event or first report of a said miracle comes along after the event, we have some serious reasons to be skeptical. Examples: the ascension of Romulus was first reported by Tacitus 800 years after the alleged event. Okay, skeptics, stop throwing Romulus out there. I think this one came up. Derek, I love you. You remember our conversation. This came up with my conversation with Derek of the Myth Vision podcast. He's probably not watching, but just in case you are, don't use Romulus. Like, the first report was Tacitus. It was 800 years after the event. Like, no, this is a belated report.
It seems a little lost on Eric that literally none of us are arguing for the historicity or verisimilitude of Romulus's heavenly ascension to godhood. That's not the point. And once again, Eric is blind to the fact that time and geography are utterly irrelevant when it comes to legendary development. The reason we skeptics bring up Romulus is because he was an archetypal figure upon whom other legendary and historical figures were divinized, a template or mold for casting others in a similar divine light. The Romulus legend was instrumental for deifying Roman emperors like Julius and Augustus Caesar, and it appears that Christianity, which was competing with the imperial cult of Rome, saw fit to do likewise in a practice known as competitive assimilation. Notice the preponderance of parallels between Jesus and Romulus, as articulated by Dr. Richard C. Miller. Both have their bodies go missing. Both are taken away in a cloud. Both are accompanied by signs and prodigies, including darkness over the land. Both feature a great commission. Both become immortalized and ascend to heaven with newly divine power and status. Both appear in post-mortal form to a witness on the road. Both feature a bright and shining appearance in their newly divine form. Eric neither grasps nor divulges any of this. Later, he'll plead for atheists to steelman apologetical arguments, yet he can't come even close to behaving by that standard. By the way, the earliest reports of Romulus's deification are from Livy and Ovid, not Tacitus. Still, long after the purported events, though that's neither here nor there. The significance of the Romulus legend lays in its ability to inspire later traditions of post-mortem deification. And the Christian tradition, to quote Dr. Miller, can be placed squarely within that of Romulus. So no, Eric, we skeptics will most decidedly not stop mentioning Romulus. He's critical to understanding the literary inspiration behind some of the earliest Christian narratives.
When did, at least reportedly, the first reports of Christianity start to get preached on the streets? In Jerusalem, 40 days after Jesus' crucifixion?
Eric is putting a lot of work on the qualifier reportedly. Was Jesus' resurrection being preached 7 weeks after the crucifixion, according to Acts? Or is 7 weeks a symbolic time frame based on ancient reverence for the number 7, a motif that is no stranger to biblical authors? We have no idea whether this is historically accurate, but for the sake of argument, let's just give it to him. 40 or so days is plenty enough time for the emergence of a pious legend. Or are we to assume that had Jesus not been raised, people who knew better would have kept a lid on any tall tales? Apologists love to argue this, but it's not borne out by reality. Just look at the cascade of falsities that surged after the 2020 U.S. presidential election. No amount of fact-checking hindered the idiocy of the January 6th Capitol riot, and the blinded by faith true believers persist to this day.
And so there's a whole lot of difference in terms of where the event was reported. Was it with opinions that were already established? No, it was in the context of Judaism, right? If you're going to go start a miracle cult, you go down to Florida, right? You do the Todd Bentley routine, okay?
Christianity arose within a historical context that was highly conducive to its core teachings, that of Hellenized Judaism. As already mentioned, ancient Jews expected a Savior Messiah. Few, if any, thought their Messiah would die and rise again, but the Hebrew texts supplied plenty of scriptural motifs about death and redemption, vicarious suffering and atonement, etc. Hosea 6, Psalms 16 and 30, and Isaiah 53 are prime examples. Judaism, which already envisioned the imminent resurrection of the dead, combined with and infused by Hellenistic thought, wherein various sacred figures conquered death and rose to the heavens as immortal and divine superbeings, paved the way for just such a religion as Christianity. Literally, all one needed was the execution of a messianic hopeful like Jesus, followed by cognitive dissonance reduction and a quick dip into the vast array of surrounding texts, motifs, and legends to get something like Christianity off the ground. Given the historical context, Christianity was almost inevitable. I'd be shocked if it didn't emerge from the time and place that it did.
Trivial events. And we just got two more here. And so these would be reports of miracles that are unconnected to any significant purpose. As Horace said, let a god not intervene unless it's not worthy of a god's untying.
I'll not spend much time on the matter of triviality, as this section itself is pretty trivial. I'll just note that I've already mentioned the Sabbatean movement, the followers of William Marion Branham, Islam, and Mormonism, none of which are or were a trivial matter for their adherents.
But what about self-serving miracles? And this is the last one of the criteria. When a reported miracle is clearly motivated by human desires such as sex, political power, greed, or craving for fame, there's substantial reason to question the legitimacy, I'm going to be able to get this out here, of such a miracle claim.
I was a registered behavior technician, trained and certified in practices involving B.F. Skinner's principles of behavioral analysis. And one thing I can tell you is that nobody does anything, ever, without there being some underlying motivation that serves them in some way. You get up to go to the bathroom because you have to pee. You eat because you're hungry or bored. You write because you want to express yourself. You even help others because it serves your needs toward altruism. It makes you feel better about yourself and that person's well-being. Not one single biblical author wrote one word without their being motivated by spreading some particular message, agenda, or propaganda. Maybe it wasn't greed, or sex, or fame, but you can bet your bippy it was something. It served them and or their community in some way. So this is simply another trivial distraction. And I've no doubt we have numerous examples from the alternative religious movements I've discussed here of members or adherents seeking something other than nefarious causes. Indeed, Sabbatai Sevi's apostle, Nathan of Gaza, warned that Sabbatai would perform no miracles for the faithful. Yet miracle stories came pouring out anyway. Nathan wasn't even attempting to capitalize on miracles, yet they formed unabated. Because human beings captivated by religious fervor and imagination are prone to pious rumor and legend, driven by any number of motivations. That is as true for the biblical authors as it is for anyone else.
So let's talk about some positive criteria real quick. Certain types of positive evidence can make the case stronger. An event could not meet all of these following criteria and still be true, but if it does, that's at least a strong argument in its favor that, again, warrants closer investigation. So how about public? Is the miracle public? Is it not restricted to one witness?
The appearance of the angel in Mormonism is attested by 3 first-hand witnesses, and nearly a dozen others claimed also to have seen this supernatural figure.
The resurrection is in front of, at least reportedly, many people, right?
Reportedly. Paul is our only first-hand source, and everything else is second-hand at best. The attestation for the angel's appearances in Mormonism beats the New Testaments by a long shot.
Is the event something that our outward senses could judge? So when Martin Harris, one of the people who said he saw the golden plate, says, yeah, I saw them through my spiritual eye, were they an object of sense or weren't they, right? What's going on here? It raises suspicion.
And what does Paul, our only first-hand source in the New Testament, say? I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preach is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. When God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. Paul does claim that Jesus appeared to him in 1 Corinthians 15, but this so-called appearance was apparently revelatory in nature, not a meeting with a revivified corpse. And since Paul places his revelatory vision of Christ on the same footing as the other apostles in 1 Corinthians 15, that strongly implies that their vision was of the same nature, heavenly Christophanies of the exalted Lord. See A.W. Zweep's The Ascension of the Messiah in Lucan Christology and James Tabor's What Did Paul Claim to Have Seen on his site Tabor blog. Suffice it to say, this raises every bit as much suspicion for the earliest claims of Jesus' so-called appearances as it does for the angelic appearances in Mormonism. At least the latter has multiple first-hand accounts versus the New Testament's total of one.
Does Jesus' resurrection pass the test? Well, Jesus reportedly appeared to people after he came back to life, talked with them, shares meals with them, even let people touch him. His resurrection was something that they could experience.
Again, reportedly. We don't have post-mortem shared meals or whole fingering in the earliest accounts, just revelatory visions. So Eric must punt to the later Gospels, written by non-eyewitness storytellers who are clearly educated in Greco-Roman literary traditions, including those of Romulus as covered earlier. This marks these authors as highly literate cultural elites, not humble fishermen. Narrators who are crafting their stories according to popular mythic tropes from various sources, not sober historians. These authors know the importance of providing their divine man narrative with post-mortal appearances to supposed witnesses, as this was par for the course in the Greco-Roman literary tradition. This is not history, it's literature. A proper understanding of the surrounding literary context makes this abundantly clear.
And according to the book of Acts, this is something that happened over a period of 40 days.
And according to Luke, presumably the same author as that of Acts, Jesus ascended and parted ways with this world on the same day that he arose from the dead. That's evidence enough that the author of Luke Acts is making it up as he goes along, embellishing and expanding the narrative as he sees fit.
Jesus reportedly appeared to many people, often in groups. This included the 11 disciples and reportedly a gathering of over 500 people at once. His resurrection was a public event.
Reportedly. Beginning with revelatory visions in the earliest accounts, later embellished by common post-mortal appearance narratives from crafty storytellers.
Be able to steel man an argument for Christianity and become familiar with the evidence enough that you could present at least the strongest positive case. Even if you don't even personally believe that the case is all that strong, you should be able to be a good, for a lack of better terms, devil's advocate.
You can't even bring yourself to steelman our position. You argue that the case of Romulus isn't credible based on the timing of the legend, when that's not remotely germane to what we're saying. Both Derek Lambert and I have discussed in detail the preponderance of mythic parallels between Jesus and Romulus as it relates to archetypal mimesis, none of which you've touched on in your presentation. You simply do not acknowledge those details or provide that information to your viewers. And you deign to preach about steel manning?
But again, a lot of times the skeptics, they're not taking Butler's wager. They haven't done these things. They're just like, well, biblical scholars and Hume. And so I don't have to really look into this.
Yes, biblical scholars and Hume. So that encapsulates the entirety of our position. Let's review what I stated at the very outset of this video. In the ancient world, people told a lot of tall tales. If you were a king or a hero, they might say you were brought into this world by special circumstances, perhaps fathered by a god. Some notable figures could magically heal the sick and even raise the dead. Turning water into wine was thought possible. So was controlling the weather. There were some esteemed figures who died and came back to life, and many others who became immortal gods that ascended to heaven. So when you see this kind of stuff in an ancient religion like Christianity, what do you suppose is going on? Indeed, this kind of close correspondence to contemporary myth and legend ought to be one of the alarming filters. Eric simply boils this down to, so what if there are other miracle claims throughout history? What he doesn't articulate is how close to the mark many of these claims were to Christian tales, how common Christianity's central themes were in the ancient world, and notably, how common they were in the very time and place from which Christianity sprang. His choice of words seek to mitigate, downplay, and soften the blow of what skeptics are actually saying. You can't very well plead for others to steelman your position if you can't even articulate what your opponent's position is. This is just hypocritical and one-sided spin masquerading as fair and balanced objectivity. What else did I state at the outset of this video? That we wouldn't get a single example of a purported miracle outside of Christianity that passes his test. Eric proposes these allegedly neutral filters for sifting through miraculous tales, but laser focuses on validating the one set of miracles within his own religious tradition, completely failing to grant anything beyond that, only propping up alternative traditions and accounts to knock them down. This conspicuously skewed methodology betrays his entire enterprise. He wants to look the part of the fair and balanced investigative researcher, but he shows his hand at every turn.
Let's look into this, because again, there could be a lot at stake in this, and you don't want to miss out on an eternity with God and a fulfilling life as a Christian.
And there's what's driving that skewed methodology. Eric wants an eternity with God. He wants to live forever in a celestial paradise. I don't have to be a mind reader to know this, because if you just listen, people will tell you who they are and what they're about. Apologists like Eric Manning do our work for us by unwittingly exposing themselves. William Lane Craig marches at the front of the line, priding himself on faux rationality, while letting slip that if there's a 1 in a million chance it's true, it's worth believing. He wants it to be true. And so does Eric. This is their true methodology, no matter how hard they try to pretend otherwise. As for me, I don't care about what I want or desire to be true. I wish I could live forever. I wish I could see my lost loved ones again. I wish that all my pain and suffering had a deeper purpose that will culminate in some greater cosmic outcome. But bending reality to your wish list isn't how truth-seeking works. I want to see reality for what it is and courageously accept it no matter what it entails. I want to understand the world around me and figure out how to best navigate it from there, not pretend that the roads and foundation are laid according to my desires. I'll follow that path of truth wherever it leads, all the while realizing that any wants, needs, or desires I do harbor should be grounded in reality, in what's realistically possible. And if I want to make those desires a reality, the onus is on me. Not a god, not a fairy tale legend, not Mother Goose, St. Nicholas, or Jesus. I am responsible for my own life and the direction it takes, insofar as I can manage. One day I will die, and that will probably be the end of it. But I'll seek to make the best of this one life, and I'll do it with the courage to face the truth. This has been Derek Bennett with A Theologica. Please give me a like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this content, my 100th video on the channel. You can also support me on Patreon, where you'll gain access to illustrated slideshows and a short online book featuring a wealth of primary sources and scholarship. Check out the courses on my channel taught by prolific academics like James Tabor, Dennis MacDonald, and Kip Davis. Everything from early Israelite religion to the Gospel's relation to Greek epics to the earliest and forgotten views of Jesus as portrayed by Mark, the first Gospel. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, do you suffer from depression, anxiety, guilt, or post-traumatic stress related to your experiences with religious dogma? If so, the Global Center for Religious Research offers certification courses in religious trauma. If this is something you've dealt with, you'll be shocked by the insight you can gain from these courses and their expert instructors. Insight into yourself and into those you care about. You'll acquire knowledge that can both help you understand the underpinnings of religious trauma and begin to free you from its clutches on a path to healing. Just visit gcrr.org/RT. It's an investment into yourself that's more than worth it. Believe me, I speak from experience. This has been A Theologica, where religion is fascinating and stupid.